I've always believed that snow muffles the truth. It blankets jagged edges, softens decay, and transforms the ugly into something pristine. Perhaps that's why I found it fitting that my hometown was buried under 8 inches of fresh powder the day I returned to bury my brother. The chapel stood exactly as I remembered it, stone and timber rising from white ground like a relic from another century. St. Augustine's had been the spiritual anchor of this place for generations, its stained glass casting kaleidoscope shadows across the faces of sinners and saints alike. Today, it would witness one more confession, though not the kind Father Richard typically heard through mahogany partition. I lingered outside longer than the cold should have allowed, watching mourners file in like black birds settling on telephone wire. Each face half familiar, aged by the decade since I'd seen them last. Each step I took through crusted snow announced my return with a rhythmic crunch that sounded like accusation. You left. You left. You left. Mother was already seated in the front pew when I slipped through the heavy oak doors. Even from behind, I recognized the rigid posture of Margaret Callahan, spine straight as judgment, shoulders squared against weakness. She wore black wool and silence like armor. Eli Turner sat beside her, his broad frame diminished somehow, his hand occasionally rising to her shoulder in gestures she neither acknowledged nor refused. I chose the back row, distancing myself as I had done for years, with state lines and area codes. From this vantage point, I could see everyone, and no one could easily see me, the prodigal son who didn't deserve the fatted calf. The casket was closed, polished oak with brass fixtures that would have made Caleb laugh. Too fancy by half, he would have said in that drawl he affected sometimes when mocking pretension. My brother was many things, stubborn, loyal to a fault, occasionally cruel in his honesty, but fancy was never one of them. Father Richard began the service with words I barely registered, something about souls and peace and God's embrace. I found myself instead cataloging sensory details, the rust metal smell of old heating vents working overtime, the soft rustle of programs, the way sunlight speared through colored glass and illuminated dust motes like suspended stars. The disconnect felt appropriate. I had lost the right to public grief years ago. Caleb James Callahan, Father Richard was saying, was a pillar of this community. And he was. The golden son who stayed, who shouldered family burdens without complaint, who took our father's failing hardware store and breathed new life into it, who checked on our mother every Sunday with fresh bread and forced conversation, who never left, unlike me. I watched faces nodding in solemn agreement throughout the chapel, Mrs. Abernathy from the post office dabbing at her eyes, Coach Welling, who'd taught us both to fish, Eli's father, whose garage shared an alley with our family's hardware store. These people had watched Caleb grow from tow-headed troublemaker to responsible businessman. To them, he was constancy incarnate. They didn't know about the midnight phone call 3 years back, when he dialed my number, drunk and hurting, his voice raw from shouting or crying, or both. "Why'd you have to go and stay gone, Mike?" he'd asked, words slurring together. What was so goddamn important out there? I hadn't answered. Not really. Just murmured platitudes about needing space, finding myself, all the cliches that stick in your throat like half-truths always do. The next day, I sent a postcard from Arizona. He never called again. Father Richard's eulogy drifted toward conclusion, his practiced cadence almost musical in its rise and fall. I didn't realize he had stopped speaking until the silence registered, a sudden vacuum that pulled my attention forward. He was walking directly toward me. The congregation shifted, heads turning, whispers rising like steam. My mother didn't move, her gaze fixed forward on the casket as if nothing unusual was happening. But it was. Father Richard stood before me now, something clutched in his weathered hands. "Michael," he said quietly, my name strange in the chapel's acoustics after such pointed absence. "He wanted you to have this." The envelope was cream-colored, sealed with red wax bearing the imprint of a key. My hands trembled slightly as I accepted it, nodding mutely at Father Richard, who squeezed my shoulder once before returning to the altar. I didn't open it then, not with all those eyes suddenly aware of my presence, not with the weight of judgment pressing on me from all sides. Instead, I slipped it into my coat pocket, where it burned like a coal against my chest for the remainder of the service. After, I stood apart, as they lowered my brother into frozen ground. The cemetery adjoined the chapel, headstones poking through snow like broken teeth. My mother never looked at me, not once, though Eli caught my eye briefly across the grave. Something in his expression, pity mixed with knowing, made me look away first. "Ashes to ashes," Father Richard intoned, "dust to dust." Snow began falling again as mourners dispersed, clinging to black coats and hair. I waited until everyone had gone, until my mother had been escorted to a waiting car by Eli, until only Father Richard remained, standing patiently nearby. "He left that with me 6 months ago," he said, gesturing to the envelope still in my pocket. "Said you'd come when it was time." "How could he know?" I asked, my voice rough from disuse. I wasn't sure myself until— "Faith, perhaps," Father Richard replied with the faintest smile. "Or knowing his brother better than his brother knew himself." I wanted to argue, to tell him Caleb hadn't known me for years, that whatever bond we'd shared had been severed that night with words that couldn't be unsaid. Instead, I nodded and turned away, trudging through deepening snow toward the rental car parked on the street. The motel room was exactly what the town deserved. Faded carpets, a bed that sagged in the middle, wallpaper peeling at the corners like old scabs. I sat on the edge of the mattress and finally removed the envelope, breaking the seal with my thumb. Inside was a small brass key, antique by the look of it, and a folded note written in Caleb's distinctive scrawl, all sharp angles and impatient crosses on his T's. "Mike, you know what this opens. You were always meant to. If you're reading this, I'm already gone. That's okay. Some conversations are easier this way. See." I turned the key over in my palm, its teeth worn smooth with age. Yes, I knew exactly what it opened, though I hadn't thought of it in years. The old shed behind the hardware store, our childhood hiding place, where we'd stashed everything from stolen cigarettes to love notes to treasures only valuable in the currency of boyhood. After midnight, I left the motel and walked through silent streets. The snow had stopped, and the sky cleared to reveal stars sharp as tacks against black velvet. My breath fogged before me as I made my way downtown, past shuttered storefronts and dark windows. Nothing had changed, yet everything felt smaller, confined by memory and expectation. The hardware store stood on Main Street, Callahan's painted in fading red letters across the brick facade. I didn't bother with the front entrance, instead cutting through the narrow alley that ran alongside. The shed was tucked behind, half hidden by overgrown bushes now bent under the weight of snow. The padlock was new, but the door was the same warped wood I remembered. The key slid in with reluctance, then turned with a click that sounded too loud in the midnight stillness. Inside smelled of dust and forgotten things, the air undisturbed for what felt like years. I pulled the chain on the single bulb hanging from the ceiling. Weak yellow light revealed cobwebs and shadows, a workbench cluttered with rusted tools, garden implements leaning against the walls. Nothing special, nothing that explained Caleb's cryptic note. But I knew better. I moved to the back corner, where loose floorboards had once concealed our most important secrets. Kneeling, I pried up the planks with fingers numbed by cold. The space beneath was deeper than I remembered, and filled with something I hadn't expected. A wooden box, about the size of a shoebox, with a small brass lock that matched my key. I lifted it out, surprised by its weight, and placed it on the workbench. Dust scattered beneath my touch as I traced the initials carved into the lid: CJC and MDC, Caleb James Callahan and Michael David Callahan. Brothers, once. Strangers, since. The key fit perfectly. I felt the mechanism engage, the subtle give of tumblers aligning. But I didn't turn it. Not yet. Something held me back. Fear, perhaps, of what truths might spill out once opened. Or maybe just the realization that once I knew whatever Caleb wanted to tell me, there would be no more mysteries between us. No more chances. The finality of it pressed against my chest like a stone. Instead, I replaced the box beneath the floorboards, pocketed the key, and walked back into the night. Tomorrow would be time enough for truth. Tonight belonged to ghosts and snow and the weight of what might have been. As I trudged back to the motel, I could almost hear Caleb laughing at my cowardice. Always the cautious one, he would have said. Always thinking too much. But some doors, once opened, can never be closed again. And I wasn't ready, not yet, to face whatever lay on the other side of this one. Morning arrived like a reluctant guest. I lay awake watching weak sunlight creep across the motel ceiling, the brass key heavy in my palm where I'd clutched it all night. Sleep had come in fragments, broken by dreams of Caleb standing in snow, mouth moving without sound, pointing toward something I couldn't see. The box beneath the floorboards waited like a confession, patient and inevitable. I hadn't planned to stay another day. My return ticket was booked for noon, a swift retreat back to the life I'd built far from here. Yet something held me in place, some invisible tether I hadn't fully severed all those years ago. I called the airline and postponed my flight, ignoring the resignation in the agent's voice when I couldn't provide a new departure date. The diner on Maple Street still served the same greasy breakfast special, still brewed coffee strong enough to dissolve spoons. I sat in a corner booth, watching the town awaken through steamed windows. Familiar strangers moved past, older, grayer versions of people I once knew. None acknowledged me. In small towns, silence is its own language. Never thought I'd see Michael Callahan order the lumberjack special again. Eli Turner stood beside my table, looking both older and exactly the same. Crow's feet around his eyes, hair receding slightly at the temples, but still wearing that half-smile that suggested he knew things others didn't. He'd been Caleb's best friend since 3rd grade, when they'd bonded over a shared detention for releasing frogs from the science classroom. "Mind if I join you?" he asked, already sliding into the booth across from me. I nodded, suddenly conscious of the miles between who I was and who I'd been. "Didn't expect to stay this long. But you found the key." It wasn't a question. The coffee between us steamed like a barrier, fragile and temporary. I met his gaze. "You knew about it." I helped him hide the box. Eli stirred sugar into his coffee with deliberate movements. "He made me promise not to tell you what was inside, said you needed to discover it yourself." "Always the dramatist," I muttered, but there was no real bitterness in it. "He was sick for a while, you know," Eli said quietly. "Longer than anyone realized. That's when he started collecting everything. Said he needed to set things right." A chill that had nothing to do with the January morning settled in my chest. "I didn't know." "How could you?" "You weren't here." The words should have stung, but Eli delivered them without malice, a simple statement of fact. I hadn't been here. I'd been thousands of miles away, building a life defined by its distance from this place. "You came to the funeral," Eli continued, watching me carefully. "That matters. Might not seem like it did to anyone else, but it would have to him. Mother didn't think so. Margaret's grief has teeth, he replied. Always has. Doesn't mean she doesn't feel your absence too. We finished breakfast in silence, the unspoken history between us thick as the syrup congealing on my plate. As we stepped outside into the cold, Eli hesitated, then reached into his jacket. I found this in the store last night. Thought you might need it. He handed me an old cassette player, batteries included. For whatever's on the tape. I stared at him. What tape? His smile was sad. The one in the box you haven't opened yet. The walk back to the shed felt different in daylight. Snow sparkled blindingly white, transforming the town into something almost beautiful. I passed the elementary school where Caleb and I had learned to fight and make up, the park where we'd pushed each other on rusted swings, the corner where our father had taught us both to ride bikes with varying degrees of patience. Memory is a curious thing, how it reshapes itself around absence, how it softens sharp edges or sharpens gentle ones, depending on what the heart needs to survive. I'd spent years remembering only the anger, the shouting, the night I'd finally broken free. But now, walking these streets, other memories surfaced. Caleb teaching me to cast a fishing line, his face serious with concentration. Both of us sprawled on the floor of our shared bedroom, arguing over album covers and guitar solos. His hand on my shoulder the day our father first raised his voice to a roar that rattled windows. The shed door creaked open easily this time. In daylight, the space looked smaller, more ordinary. Dust motes danced in shafts of light filtering through grimy windows. I knelt in the corner and pried up the floorboards again, retrieving the box we'd carved our initials into as boys. This time, I turned the key. Inside were several items, each wrapped carefully in tissue paper. A cassette tape labeled in Caleb's handwriting, "If he ever comes back." Beneath it, a small leather-bound journal, dog-eared and worn, a folded piece of yellowed notebook paper, and at the bottom, a hand-drawn map of what appeared to be the hardware store, with a section of the back storage loft circled in red. I unwrapped the cassette first, slipping it into the player Eli had provided. My hands trembled slightly as I pressed play. Caleb's voice filled the shed, startlingly present, as if he were standing beside me instead of lying beneath frosted earth. "Mike, if you're listening to this, I finally managed to die. Probably for the best. You know, I always had to have the last word." His attempt at humor caught in my throat. I could picture him recording this, trying to smile through whatever pain he'd kept hidden. "There's a room above the store," his voice continued. "Dad never knew about it. I found it when I was fixing the roof after the '92 storm. Converted it into something of a sanctuary. The map will show you how to access it. There's a hidden staircase behind the paint supply shelves. The combination is your birthday." He paused, and I heard him take a breath. "I need you to know I never told Mom the truth about that night, about Dad, about why you really left. Let her believe what she needed to. Maybe that was wrong. Probably was. But I couldn't." His voice broke briefly. "I couldn't lose both of you." I stopped the tape, needing a moment to breathe against the sudden tightness in my chest. 10 years crystallized into a single admission. He'd protected me, even in my absence. Even when I'd given him every reason not to. I pocketed the tape player and gathered the other items, securing the box back in its hiding place. The hardware store would be closed on a Sunday, but I still had the spare key Mother had pressed into my hand when I'd turned 16. "In case you ever need to help your brother," she'd said. I wondered if she'd regretted those words in the years since. Callahan's hardware stood silent and shadowed when I let myself in through the back entrance. The smell hit me immediately. Sawdust, metal, the faint chemical tang of paint. Dad's smell. Caleb's smell. The business they'd shared while I'd chosen books and words instead. I navigated through familiar aisles toward the back storage area. The map was simple but precise, marking the hidden access point behind a set of shelves that could be swung outward if you knew the mechanism. The latch was disguised as a loose nail. When pulled, it released a catch that allowed the entire unit to move. Behind the shelving was a narrow staircase, dusty and dim. I climbed cautiously, each step groaning beneath my weight. At the top was a door with a combination lock, 4 digits. My birthday, just as Caleb had said, August 17th. The lock clicked open, and the door swung inward to reveal a small room tucked into the eaves of the old building. Afternoon light filtered through a single skylight, illuminating what could only be described as a shrine to shared memory. The walls were covered with photographs, newspaper clippings, and drawings, a visual history of 2 brothers. I recognized images from fishing trips at Lake Morrison, school plays, the summer we'd built a raft that sank within minutes of launching. Between these were artifacts, the fossil we'd found in the quarry, mounted on a small stand, a shadow box containing baseball cards we'd collected, the first dollar the store had earned under Caleb's management, framed alongside the last dollar Dad had earned before his heart gave out. In the center of the room sat a small desk with a reading lamp, a chair, and a leather journal different from the one in the box. Beside it was a cassette player, more sophisticated than the portable one Eli had given me, with a stack of carefully labeled tapes. Summer '87, Graduation Day, Dad's Funeral, and most recently, For Michael, Listen First. I settled into the chair and placed the tape into the deck, bracing myself for whatever message waited. The recording began with several seconds of silence, then music, the opening notes of Tangled Up in Blue, our song. The one we'd played endlessly the summer before I left, when things were already fraying but not yet broken. Caleb's voice came in after the first verse. Remember when we stole Dad's truck to see Dylan in Buffalo? You were so sure we'd get caught. We didn't. Some of the best moments of my life were when you stopped being careful and just lived. More music played then. I kept everything, Mike. Every postcard you sent. Every news clipping when one of your stories got published. The poem that won the state prize in high school. The one Dad said was a waste of time. I framed it. It's on the wall behind you. I turned to see it. The composition I'd written at 17 about rivers and leaving. The certificate now faded, but still intact. I was wrong that night, Caleb continued, his voice rougher now. What I said about you abandoning us. Truth is, you were braver than I ever managed to be. You got out. I stayed angry about that for years, until I realized you had to go. This town would have hollowed you out. I closed my eyes, remembering the night that had severed us. Dad drunk and raging, Caleb standing between us as I packed a duffel bag. You walk out that door, you're no son of mine, Dad had shouted. And Caleb, trying to keep peace as always. Don't do this, Mike. Family sticks together. You're not family, I'd replied, the words barbed and deliberate. You're just people I'm related to. The recording continued, pulling me back to the present. The journal explains the rest. I should have told you years ago, but pride's a Callahan family trait, isn't it? Stubbornness, too. A long pause. I miss you, brother. Always have. The tape clicked off, leaving me in silence, disturbed only by my own uneven breathing. I opened the journal with hands that didn't feel like my own. Inside, in Caleb's meticulous writing, was a decade of confession. Thoughts he'd never spoken, truths he'd protected, regrets that had shadowed him. One entry, dated 3 years ago, stood out. Called Mike tonight. Drunk, dialing your only brother after Dad's been dead 5 years. Pathetic, right? Couldn't even say what I needed to. Just accused and whined like I was 16 again. He sent a postcard after. Just a picture of some canyon and thinking of you. That's Mike, always the poet, even when words fail. Truth is, Dad started that final fight. Told Mike no son of his would waste his life writing that garbage. Found Mike's college acceptance letters and tore them up. When Mike fired back that he'd rather die than turn into Dad, the old man took a swing. I stepped between them, got clipped instead. That's when Mike shoved Dad back, not hard, but enough that he stumbled over the coffee table. Mom came in, saw Dad on the floor, me with a bloody lip, and Mike standing there with his fists clenched. She assumed. We all let her. It was easier than admitting Dad was wrong, that Mike had dreams worth defending, that I was jealous of his certainty, his talent, his courage to leave. I've rewritten this family story for years, cast myself as the loyal son, Mike as the rebel who abandoned us. The truth is messier, always is. I read until light faded from the skylight, until Caleb's voice in written word became as real as the recorded one. The journal detailed his illness, diagnosed terminal 6 months ago, hidden from Mother as long as possible. His methodical preparation of this room, this box, this final confession. His quiet certainty that I would return when called. Night had fallen by the time I made my way back to the motel, my mind replaying Caleb's words like a litany. He'd protected me in my absence, defended me in silence, kept every fragment of connection I'd carelessly tossed back from distant places. I sat on the edge of the bed and listened to the remainder of the tape from the shed. "There's one more thing, Mike," Caleb's voice said, weary but determined. "Mom deserves to know the truth about that night. All of it. Not from a tape, not from a letter. From you. I'm a coward asking this from beyond whatever grave they put me in, but she needs to hear it. Maybe then both of you can stop carrying the weight of someone else's anger." The tape hissed with silence. Then, "You were always my home too, Mike." I stared at the key in my palm, no longer simply metal, but a weight of responsibility. A truth waiting to be unlocked. A door between past and future. Tomorrow, I would visit the house I grew up in. Tomorrow, I would face my mother. Tonight, I allowed myself to grieve. Not just for Caleb, but for the decade we'd lost to pride and misunderstanding. For the brotherhood that had never truly died, just gone dormant like winter trees, waiting for the right season to bloom again. Sleep came in fitful bursts that night, my dreams threaded with Caleb's voice and fragments of memory. I woke before dawn, the truth of yesterday settling into my bones like cold. Outside, fresh snow had fallen, the world erased and rewritten overnight. A clean page. The cassette player sat on the nightstand, Caleb's final request echoing in my head. Mom deserves to know the truth. Easy for him to say from beyond consequence. Yet, I understood his purpose now. This wasn't just about clearing my name, but about freeing us both from the gravity of misplaced blame. I didn't take the car to my childhood home. Some journeys need to be made on foot, each step a conscious choice rather than mechanical progress. Our family home stood at the end of Orchard Street, a 2-story colonial with faded blue paint and black shutters. I paused at the gate, suddenly transported to that final night. How I'd slammed it behind me, duffel bag over my shoulder, refusing to look back even as Caleb called my name from the porch. How easy it had been then, fueled by righteous anger and wounded pride, to keep walking. How much harder now to take those same steps in reverse. I knocked rather than using my old key. Some thresholds can only be recrossed by invitation. The door opened to reveal Margaret Callahan, framed in the entrance of the house she'd maintained through a husband's death and a son's departure. She looked both smaller and sharper than I recalled, her hair now completely silver, her face mapped with lines I'd never seen. Michael. My name in her voice was neither welcome nor rejection, just acknowledgement, as neutral as reading from a register. Hello, Mother. She didn't move to embrace me, nor did I expect it. Instead, she stepped back from the doorway, the minimum concession necessary for entry. I crossed the threshold as if walking into the past, immediately assaulted by the familiar smell of lemon polish and wood smoke that had always defined home. The kitchen was different, updated with new countertops and appliances. Caleb's doing, I suspected. The only constants were the ancient oak table, where we'd eaten thousands of meals, and the copper-bottom pots hanging above the stove, their undersides burnished to a warm glow by decades of use. Mother made coffee with practiced efficiency. We sat across from each other at the table, steam rising between us like a barrier. I saw you at the funeral, she said finally. In the back. I nodded. I wasn't sure I'd be welcome closer. It was his funeral, not mine. A pause, her fingers tracing the wood grain. He would have wanted you there. Why did you come to the house today? She asked after a silence, her voice carefully neutral. I reached into my pocket and placed the cassette player on the table between us. Caleb left something for me to find. I think you should hear it too. Her expression didn't change, but I noticed her knuckles whitening around her coffee cup. I don't need recordings to remember my son. It's not just about remembering him, I said quietly. It's about understanding why I left. The words hung in the air, dangerous as icicles poised to fall. For 10 years, we'd maintained the polite fiction that my absence was simple abandonment, selfish, inexcusable. To suggest another narrative was to question the foundation she'd rebuilt her life upon. I know why you left, she said, voice brittle as frost. You made your choice very clear that night. You know what you saw, not what happened before. I told her then, words spilling out in a steady flow, how Dad had found my college acceptance letters, how he'd raged about wasted potential and family obligation, how his words had turned to fists when I refused to back down, how Caleb had intervened, caught between us as always, how she'd entered at the worst possible moment, seeing only the aftermath of my defensive shove. I never told you because you'd already lost Dad to his temper so many times, I said. I couldn't take away your illusion that at least one of us was to blame, that it wasn't just him breaking things again. She sat perfectly still, face unreadable. Then, with movements deliberate as prayer, she pressed play on the cassette. Caleb's voice filled the kitchen, ghost and witness both. I watched her expression as he confirmed my account, as he confessed his own silence, as he spoke of regret and missed chances. Her composure remained intact, but tears tracked silently down her face, unacknowledged. When the recording finished, she reached out and switched it off with a decisive click. I knew, she said simply. The words landed like stones in still water. What? I knew your father started it. I saw the torn letters in the trash that night. I heard the beginning of the argument from the garden. Her hands trembled slightly as she smoothed an invisible wrinkle from the tablecloth. I chose not to see. But you let me leave, I said, an old hurt rising in my voice. You let me go believing you thought the worst of me. Because you were already gone in every way that mattered. Her gaze was direct now, unflinching. You'd been planning your escape for years, Michael. That night was just your excuse. The truth of it struck me silent. I had been planning my departure, filling out applications in secret, saving summer job money in an account Dad didn't know about, researching cities far from this one. The confrontation hadn't created my desire to leave. It had merely accelerated a departure already set in motion. And Caleb knew too, I said finally. He protected Dad's memory. Protected you. He protected all of us, she corrected. Your father wasn't a simple man. What happened that night? It was the worst of him, but not all of him. Caleb understood that family means holding both truths. While I just ran. Yes. No absolution in her voice, just acknowledgement. And perhaps that was what you needed to do. But it cost us all, Michael, more than you know. He kept everything I ever sent, I said, throat tight. Every postcard, every clipping. So did I. She rose then, disappearing into the hall briefly, before returning with a shoebox worn at the edges. Inside were all my discarded fragments, postcards with hasty scrawls, newspaper mentions of stories published, the single Christmas card I'd sent 3 years ago with no return address. We both kept you, in our own ways, she said, not quite meeting my eyes. Even when we were furious with your absence, the realization bloomed slowly. They had preserved me just as carefully as I had excised them. While I'd been constructing a life defined by distance, they had been maintaining one shaped around a missing piece. I'm sorry, I said, the words inadequate but necessary, for staying gone so long. And I'm sorry, she replied, each word carefully measured, for letting you believe you weren't missed. It wasn't forgiveness exactly. That would take more than one morning's truth-telling. But it was a door nudged open after years of being locked. We talked then, really talked, about Caleb's illness that he'd hidden from both of us until near the end, about Dad's complicated legacy of love and damage, about the years we'd lost to stubborn silence. When I finally left, the snow had stopped, and afternoon light gilded everything in sight. Mother stood in the doorway, watching me navigate the walkway she'd cleared. At the gate, I turned back. I extended my stay, I said. I'll be here through the weekend at least. She nodded once. Sunday dinner is at 5. I still make pot roast. I remember. The invitation hung between us, fragile as blown glass, but real. My feet carried me back to St. Augustine's, its stone facade softened by afternoon light. Inside, I slid into the same back pew I'd occupied during the funeral, now transformed by 3 days of truth-telling and revelation. The wooden box from the shed sat heavy in my coat pocket. I'd retrieved it on my way here, knowing its journey was nearly complete. Father Richard emerged from the sacristy and sat beside me, leaving appropriate space between us. You found what he left you, he said, not a question. Yes. And? I understand now why he wanted me to have it. I removed the box from my pocket and placed it on the pew between us. I'd like to leave this here, maybe on the altar, if that's permitted. It belongs in this town, with him. Of course. Together we walked to the altar. I placed the box and the key beside it, a small offering to whatever forces govern memory and reconciliation. Will you be leaving again soon? Father Richard asked as we returned to the pew. Not yet, I replied. I've been invited to Sunday dinner. His smile was gentle with understanding. The hardest journeys are often the ones that lead us home. I left the chapel as evening approached, snow crunching beneath my feet, with each step toward the future. Next week, I would return to my apartment, my job, my carefully constructed life, but not unchanged. The walls I'd built between past and present had crumbled, leaving something messier but more honest in their place. In my pocket, I carried Caleb's last cassette, the one from the room above the store. I would listen to it again tonight in the quiet of my motel room. I would hear my brother's voice speak across the divide of death, telling me what I had been afraid to acknowledge. That love persists even when unacknowledged, that bridges can be rebuilt over the deepest chasms, that some doors, once opened, reveal not just the pain we feared, but the healing we needed. The key had served its purpose. The last door now stood ajar, not fully open, perhaps, but no longer locked against possibility. Overhead, stars emerged one by one as darkness fell, each a pinpoint of light in endless space, distant but constant. Much like memory, much like forgiveness, much like the brother I'd lost and found in the same snowy week, whose final gift had been not just truth, but the courage to face it. "You were always my home too, Mike," I whispered to the winter air, words disappearing into night like prayer. And somewhere, in whatever comes after this life, I like to think Caleb heard,